Former World Economic Forum executive Sheila Warren is now CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation, a Washington-based lobbying group. Warren will be responsible for leading the discussion of crypto on behalf of the CCI by communicating its benefits to policymakers and regulators. She's also a co-host of CoinDesk TV's Money Reimagined. Joining us is Sheila Warren in San Francisco. Good morning, Sheila. Thanks for waking up bright and early for us. So I wonder, what inspired you to make this transition, and how is it different from your previous role at the World Economic Forum?
Thanks for having me, Christine. It's always a pleasure to see you. Yeah, it was the right time. I mean, it was very clear to me for the past year that things were brewing, not just in Washington, but all around the world, and that we were at a time where over the next, honestly, 6 months to 2 years, we're just going to see tremendous activity that either promotes blockchain and promotes crypto, or that kind of kills it. And that's going to be dependent on where you are in the world. So I felt like it was time to kind of jump in with both feet and really just be a voice advocating on behalf of this open ecosystem that we all think is so important.
Oh, Emily, you're on mute.
Sorry. What are some of the biggest challenges in conveying that message to Washington policymakers? Is it just like a lack of understanding of crypto? Is it just that people still associate crypto with crime and the dark web? I mean, what would you say are the main obstacles to overcome in convincing Washington policymakers that crypto is actually good for the United States?
Well, I think it's everything that you've just said. I think, frankly, in earlier years, the industry hasn't done itself a lot of favors. We haven't really taken the effort, I think, to meet with people where they were. There's been a lot of education that's been done over the past couple of years, part of which I have helped to do here when I was at the World Economic Forum, and will continue to do here at CCI. But I think that we haven't really made the case. And so with some people we have, with others it remains to be done. And so I think that there is still perception, that's some outmoded perceptions about crime. There's a lot of misperception about energy, all the standard kind of tropes that you hear. And it's really up to all of us to be building an evidence-based case and really showing and demonstrating that even if that were true at one point in time, it certainly isn't the case now.
So Sheila, it seems to me that there's sort of two separate problems here. One is that, yes, we haven't clearly articulated the case for crypto, but then the other problem is, how do you convince policymakers that this is something worth fighting for? There's so many things on their agenda, and this, as of now, this isn't really an election issue. So how do you convince policymakers that this is urgent enough for them to put some skin in the game?
Part of that, I think, is on all of us who are involved in the crypto ecosystem to actually make that case and reach out. So I think we do need some grassroots activity from voters saying this is important. And here's where it falls in my list of priorities as a voter. That's something I think that we're going to be looking into at CCI, to think about how do we activate that base? How do we get people to understand that their constituents are paying attention to this and they do think it's really important? And then on the other hand, I think that you're right. It's an election cycle going into the midterms here. And so how do we make sure that crypto remains something that is not killed or kind of forgotten about in the midst of all the politicking that's going to be happening, that's already starting? I think there we have to look around the world and say, look, the United States has an opportunity to be a leader in this space, or to continue to be a follower, or at worst, where we really have been, not paying enough attention at all. And if we don't, someone else is going to take advantage of the tremendous growth of the economy that this is going to bring as an industry and jump on it. And so it's kind of now or never. So whether or not it may fall in the top priorities for any particular constituents, any particular politician's constituency, this is going to be a missed opportunity that we're all going to have to take very seriously, because we don't want to look back 5 years from now and think, oh, there was that tremendous growth engine and we just let it go.
Sheila, there are a couple of parts of the crypto industry that are worrisome to members of Congress and to regulators, namely crypto lending and stablecoins, and the assets that are backing stablecoins, and the lack of transparency. So what exactly is CCI's approach to that? Does it have an approach? And how should it be dealt with by Congress, by regulators? And what are you going to do to deal with it?
Yeah, well, my hope is that we can kind of move beyond this very pointed focus on stablecoins that's been happening, because I think we kind of landed the point there, in my view, and there's been a lot of, I think, evidence-based case made already. And there seems to be pretty strong understanding of stablecoins and some of the complications there, which you're alluding to, like what is actually backing kind of the value there. So I think the understanding is there. I think it's a matter of just landing some final, kind of guidance from these various bodies that's going to help us move forward. That being said, said, I think that this is where a lot of the confusion comes up. There isn't a clear understanding in my mind about the differences between even the basics of a CBDC, a stablecoin, and crypto. This is not really clearly understood, and there's a lot of equation of this thing with that thing, and they're all the same, and why does it matter? If we're going to have a digital dollar and the Fed's going to do that, then why do we care about anything else? So I think we do have to continue to articulate these are not the same thing. They have different purposes. They were derived for different uses, and so how do we make that crystal clear so that these policymakers understand what exactly it is they're going to be providing guidance on when, and they can provide adequate guidance. But yeah, to your point, I think that there's a lot of mixing of things that are going on here, and part of what we want to do is create almost clarity, but almost swim lanes to say, here's where this thing will be affected by regulation of the other thing, and here's where it won't be.
The issue about stablecoins, though, is that it hasn't been really settled, or it hasn't, and nothing seems to be settled. And I do think that the Congress does understand the difference between the CBDCs and stablecoins. But what their issue is that there is no sense of how is it going to be regulated and by whom. And can it be? Is it a bank? Is it a security? Is it what? Where does it fall? So where does CCI come in to say, look, we think, guys, this should be regulated by the OCC. This should be done by the SEC. Where do you guys fall in this? How are you guiding that? And then also to the question about crypto lending, where do you fall on there? Because there are a lot of questions as to whether or not this is essentially a form of security by guaranteeing these rates or making it sound like they're guaranteeing high rates to consumers. And ultimately, the regulators have the consumers, the average Joe in America, who's putting their money into this in mind. So where does CCI fall when it comes to that aspect of the crypto markets?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems we have here is agency, I don't even want to call it competition, but just confusion around who is regulating what and where do these things belong. And we're really hoping that this executive order provides some clarity, or at least requires coordination across these agencies. Because right now, depending on who you talk to, there's either almost competition to be the one that's got oversight, or there's almost a desire to not be the one that's got oversight. And that's almost person by person, not even agency by agency. So even within the agencies, you've got different points of view that are emerging as to what oversight should fall where. Our view is that we need to understand that. Our view is primarily pulling up a level. We need clarity from these agencies about who is going to do what. Now, in terms of our view, there's pros and cons to each agency having oversight of different things. And so that's all kind of well understood. Our view is that we just need that clarity to understand who we need to go to when, and which issuer is going to be going where for what. So right now, what we're seeing, to your point, I actually don't agree that there's a lot of clarity between the difference between a digital dollar and stablecoin. I still hear questions about, well, why do we need a USDC, for example, if we're going to have something that the Fed is working with directly? I think there's an understanding those are not the same thing for obvious reasons. Like one is fiat and one is not. Nevertheless, the uses are not fully understood, is what I'm still hearing from people. And I think there's still education we have to do there. But I also think that part of what we need to do is just see, can we get these agencies to cooperate? Because at the end of the day, I don't think we're going to get one regulator that's looking after everything. We're going to have coordinated action by these different agencies, which means that their broad frame on what these things are and what they aren't and what their potential is and trajectory is going to have to be common. Otherwise, we're regulating the tail of the elephant and the head of the elephant, and those are not the same thing. Even though we know it's an elephant, it's going to wind up looking very, very different and at cross purposes.
Yeah. Just looking at last year, the CCI hosted the B Word conference. It had a huge headlining series of guests, including Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, Cathie Wood. Have you met with them, and do you plan to work with them in any way going forward?
Yeah, so some of those organizations are members of CCI, and there is conversation happening right now about whether or not another conference makes sense. I think that was a hugely successful conference. It had, obviously, as you know, got a lot of attention, and I think it did help land certain cases around certain topics. Energy was one, but also just kind of the various uses of Bitcoin, whether it's for human rights and advocacy, whether it's for cross-border payments, whatever it might be. The privacy elements, all those kinds of things, I think were really well received. And so the question becomes, who would the audience be for such an event this coming year? We haven't fully decided yet exactly if we're going to go forward with that conference, but there's certainly conversation underway because we can see the value.
Sheila, if you were to outline your 3 top priorities or things that you'd like to get accomplished with CCI this year and have folks in DC understand? What would they be?
So first of all, I'd say it's DC and beyond. I think we do want to make the case globally to all those who are in a position to shape the enabling environment in which crypto is operating, that crypto is not only here to stay, it is going to be a tool of tremendous financial growth. It's going to help drive financial inclusion. And really what we're looking to do is just change the global public perception. That's going to start not just with policymakers, but also with people on the ground who are going to be people who are quite influential, that their use is going to influence the politicians with their constituents to kind of say, this is something that we care about and is really important. So I'd say for top three, it's really continuing to make that case using evidence that, look, we're not only here to stay, there's some positive impact, there's more coming. Number two, really pointing out that there's going to be some jurisdictional clash here. And so what we want to push for is a more globally coordinated effort, leaving aside even the own complications of our own agencies here in the United States. We need to be thinking globally because this is a global technology and it's not going to be specifically located in only one jurisdiction. So how do we help support that global coordination? And then third, I would say it's really to unify crypto stakeholders. So I do think CCI tries to speak on behalf of the crypto ecosystem. We're here really for all open permissionless, decentralized blockchains. And we want to make the case that regardless of which specific protocol or specific company or whatnot, there's something about this value proposition that's incredibly powerful and should be shepherded and sheltered while we're in this phase of massive growth, not quelled and quashed and squashed, in ways that are not going to be productive for society ultimately.